There are times in the long journey of the Church when something quietly refuses to be ignored. Not because it demands attention, not because it arrives with noise or controversy, but because its presence carries a gravity that presses on the conscience. These moments do not announce themselves with campaigns or declarations. They do not arrive with slogans or manifestos. They come softly, almost unnoticed at first, yet once they appear, they cannot easily be dismissed. What has been unfolding recently within the Catholic world belongs to that kind of moment. What we are seeing is not loud. It is not aggressive. It does not seek to provoke or to dominate the conversation. And yet it carries a weight that words alone cannot match. It is not an isolated occurrence, nor a local curiosity, nor a marginal provocation destined to fade after a few days of discussion. Over recent months, something unmistakable has been taking shape across different parts of the Catholic world, solemn celebrations of the traditional Roman Rite presided over not by fringe figures or retired prelates, but by bishops and cardinals fully active within the living hierarchy of the Church. If you haven't subscribed, click on the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos like this, because what you're about to hear is not just news, it's a wake-up call for every heart that still believes truth should burn brighter than silence. Now grab your rosary, quiet your spirit, and let your heart listen, not just with ears, but with faith. These celebrations do not emerge from ideological platforms. They are not framed as protests or acts of resistance. No speeches are given to explain or defend them. There are no lengthy justifications offered to calm critics or persuade supporters. Instead, they assert themselves through something far more difficult to argue against: reality. The altar prepared with care. Vestments worn according to ancient custom. Silence that is not empty but full. Chant that rises without explanation. Sacred gestures performed deliberately and reverently. These are public, concrete, documented acts of worship. Because these actions are not wrapped in polemics, they are harder to neutralize. They cannot be dismissed as rhetoric or reduced to talking points. They resist being turned into slogans. They simply exist, and in existing, they speak. For that reason, what is happening cannot honestly be brushed aside as liturgical folklore or the nostalgia of a shrinking minority. The facts are too visible, too consistent, too convergent. And perhaps most strikingly, they do not originate in obscure or forgotten corners of the Church. They are taking place in places that matter, at moments that matter, under the authority of pastors whose roles cannot be dismissed as symbolic. In the heart of Advent, on December 20th, something quietly decisive occurred in Corsica. In the Cathedral of Santa Maria in Bastia, Cardinal François-Xavier Bastillo, Bishop of Ajaccio, administered the sacrament of confirmation according to the traditional Roman Rite. This was not a private mass tucked away from view. It was not an experiment conducted behind closed doors. It was not a reluctant concession made to a distant chapel. It was a cathedral, the heart of diocesan life. It was presided over by a cardinal. It took place during Advent, at the threshold of Christmas, when the Church waits in silence and expectation. The cardinal presided over First Vespers of the fourth Sunday of Advent, and at the conclusion of that solemn liturgy he confirmed 32 faithful from the chapel of Monserrato in Bastia and the chapel of San Antonio in Upper Corsica. Every element of this matters. The cathedral matters because it is not a neutral space, it is the visible seat of the bishop's authority to teach and sanctify. What happens there speaks beyond those physically present. It resonates symbolically throughout the diocese. The liturgical season matters because Advent is not empty time. It is a season shaped by watchfulness, restraint, and longing. Celebrating the traditional Roman Rite during Advent is not a matter of aesthetic preference. It is a coherent expression of the Church's theology of waiting and hope. Even the number of those confirmed matters. 32 faithful are not a token group assembled to make a point. They represent families, catechesis, formation, and continuity. They represent a living community rooted in the Church. Nothing about this was accidental. This celebration was not tolerated on the margins but integrated into the ordinary life of the diocese. It was presided over by a cardinal, in a cathedral, during one of the most intense periods of the liturgical year. And yet, almost immediately, a familiar reflex appeared. The event was described as a personal choice, a Corsican peculiarity, a local exception. Something interesting, perhaps even charming, but ultimately insignificant. A footnote. That interpretation was comforting because it allowed the event to be safely contained. But it was also mistaken. While Ajaccio and Bastia were being reduced to a curiosity, something else was already unfolding thousands of miles away, something that made the idea of isolated incidents increasingly difficult to sustain. And this time, it would take place in front of the young. In Columbus, Ohio, an event occurred that shattered the remaining illusion that these celebrations could be dismissed as marginal or accidental. Robert Reed, auxiliary bishop of Boston, celebrated Mass according to the traditional Roman rite during one of the largest Catholic youth gatherings in North America. This was not a parish anniversary or a quiet weekday liturgy. It was not a gathering of elderly faithful clinging to memories of the past. It was the Sikh Conference of 2026. Sikh brings together several thousand young Catholics from across the United States. University students, young professionals, seminarians, families, men and women who represent a significant portion of the Church's future. The Mass took place at 2:15 in the afternoon at St. Patrick's Church in the heart of Columbus. Again, the details matter. St. Patrick's is not a peripheral chapel. Sikh is not a niche event. Focus, the organization behind the conference, is one of the most influential Catholic evangelization movements in the country, known for its structure, reach, and emphasis on young adults. In this context, an auxiliary bishop publicly celebrated the traditional Roman rite, not alone and not improvising, but with the liturgical assistance of the priestly fraternity of St. Peter, a priestly institute fully in communion with Rome whose charism is the celebration of this liturgy. There was nothing ambiguous here. No canonical gray areas. No pastoral evasions. No quiet permissions slipped under the table. Names were clear. Places were public. The rite was unmistakable. This clarity is precisely what makes the event impossible to dismiss as folklore. For years, the traditional liturgy has often been portrayed as a problem to be managed, a relic to be tolerated at best or suppressed at worst, an obstacle to evangelization and especially to reaching the young. And yet, what was visible in Columbus told a different story. Thousands of young people, many encountering this form of the Mass not as a childhood memory but as a discovery. Silence that speaks. Gestures that teach without explanation. A sense of transcendence that does not ask to be justified. This is not ideology. It is observable reality. The question is not whether the event was legitimate. It clearly was. The deeper question is why it is happening now, in this context, and before the eyes of the young. At a time when so much energy is invested in innovation, adaptation, and reinvention, why does the Mass of all time continue to draw the very demographic so often cited as the reason for abandoning it? No document can erase that question. No statement can silence it. Because the liturgy itself has already spoken, and it speaks with a clarity that no press release can match. Corsica and Ohio. Ajaccio and Columbus. Different cultures, different continents, yet the same direction. A thread runs through these events, not woven by strategy or rebellion, but by fidelity. These bishops and cardinals do not issue challenges or declare opposition. They simply celebrate what they have received. And as these facts accumulate, another phenomenon becomes increasingly noticeable: silence. No official condemnation. No dramatic correction. No public distancing. Just an uneasy quiet. Because denying what is happening becomes more difficult with each altar prepared, each chant sung, each confirmation conferred. The traditional liturgy is not disappearing. It is re-emerging, not at the edges, but at the center. This is where the phrase, heroic bishop, takes on a different meaning. Not heroism as spectacle or defiance or self-promotion, but heroism as fidelity. These pastors are not revolutionaries or rebels chasing an imagined golden age. They are not ideologues fighting a culture war. They are men of the church doing something profoundly simple and therefore profoundly costly. They celebrate the church's liturgy as it has been handed down. And today, that alone is enough to provoke controversy. They do not shout or publish manifestos. They do not rally crowds. They vest, ascend the altar, and pray. In doing so, they accept the consequences, including scrutiny, misunderstanding, and tension within the church itself. This is not nostalgia. Nostalgia clings to the past because it has no future. What we are witnessing is different. It is a living demand, a hunger for reverence, a longing for the sacred, a desire for something that does not shift with trends. The liturgy responds before arguments are formed, before debates begin, before explanations are offered. It responds in silence. Time will tell whether these gestures remain isolated or mark the beginning of a new phase in the Church's life. But one thing is already clear. What is happening cannot be undone by pretending it is not happening. The Mass of all time continues to speak, and the young are listening. If this message touched your heart, like this video and share your thoughts in the comment or comment Amen and stay with us. More Eucharistic stories, deeper reflections, and holy insights are on the way. May Christ in the Eucharist be your light, your rest, your truth. Amen.